Never thought I'd be making this video, but here we are. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video I'm going to be talking about the realm of the Elderlings. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about the final trilogy, the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, which I finished fairly recently. And unfortunately, instead of telling you how amazing it was, I'm going to be talking about all of the problems that I had with it. So this will be somewhat a series review, somewhat a discussion on the realm of the Elderlings in general. It's going to be kind of a longer video, so I'll have some timestamps for you if you want to skip around. I will get into probably some spoilers, which will be timestamped also, but the bulk of this is going to be spoiler-free, but there'll be some specific things later on talking about very specific problems with the books. So the first thing I want to note is that I previously made a Why You Should Read Realm of the Elderling video, and that was after I'd finished the first 9 books, Farseer, Live Ship Traders, and the Tawny Man trilogy. And the Tawny Man trilogy has an ending that feels like a series ending. It was a fantastic ending. I loved that trilogy, and still, at that point, had bumped this up to my #2 series of all time. And considering I'd heard all of these things about the last trilogy, I honestly expected this to actually overtake the Wheel of Time, do that thing that seemed impossible, and overtake the Wheel of Time as my #1 series. But then, unfortunately, I read the next 7 books. So, the Rainwild Chronicles. Most people have probably heard that pretty much all fans look at that as the low point of the series, have it not be as good. The story goes it was supposed to be a duology, and the publisher wanted it split into 4 books. So what you get is 2 very YA-feeling long books that are really just one long plot split into 2 that had no reason to, and then the last 2 books, which are shorter and definitely also should have been one book where we kind of rushed to do some things. So I went in with pretty much no expectations for the Rainwild Chronicles, and I still was just incredibly disappointed. That was a series that I would have just DNF'd had I not been specifically trying to get to the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, thinking it was all going to be redeemed. I, even at the time, was saying I'll definitely reread the first 9 books probably many times, we'll never reread those. But I kept hearing that, okay, things are going to get back on track with Fitz and the Fool, and then you're going to be like, oh my gosh, it was definitely worth it. But that was kind of the first sign that things were changing because of the fact that I straight up had hot books I just did not like, which I didn't think was going to happen. So getting into Fitz and the Fool trilogy, we start with Fool's Assassin, which definitely felt like a Fitz book. We're going in, it's a slow book. A lot of it is just kind of seeing the day-to-day of our main character, which is pretty normal for Hob, and this definitely felt, the prologue of this one immediately sucked me in. I was sold, the epilogue was beautiful, and everything in between, despite the fact there were some conveniences, some things that were glossed over, still felt like an excellent Hob book, and I gave it 5 stars. However, we then get to Fool's Quest Book 2, where this entire book, while there were still some good parts and it wasn't bad, it started to really feel like we were just stalling for some reason. There was definitely a lot to get set up. We were doing some odd things with the timeline where different characters were and things going on like that, but it still was pretty good, but this is where I started to worry a bit how things were going. And then it finally gets us to Assassin's Fate, which was just plain not a good book. I know a lot of people still love this, and there were still definitely parts that I enjoyed, but this was not a good book. There were parts that were just incredibly rushed. There were huge things that had been being set up the whole trilogy that were just over very quickly and didn't really hold a lot of weight. There were so many plot conveniences, things that didn't make sense, really dumb decisions just to force the story into the direction that Rob and Hob wanted it to go. I'm sad to say that. There have definitely been some other examples where things happened and it felt like, I don't know if that was the only option. We could have thought about it. We do have our 2, with Fitz being a character who tends to make some dumb decisions. This book really took it to the extreme, though. It just went and built and built and built, and then we finally get there and it's just very underwhelming, as well as just, especially the ending, having things that would have made so much more sense if they were written in a different way. And so that's where it got pretty disappointing for me with it, because of the fact that I get all the way here and I unfortunately am just disappointed. It's not a terribly written book by any means, but it really didn't feel like a Hob book. It didn't feel like a Hob book where everything is intentional. Even if some things are being pushed a little, this felt like things were just kind of being thrown together. And there were a couple of ideas, things that were going to happen. Didn't really know how it was going to happen, but it's just going to happen. A lot of it just that really made no sense. We get a lot of answers in this book. Some of it to questions we didn't necessarily ask. But we get a lot of answers, but we also just get a lot of things that make no sense and really get no explanation for why they are the way that they are. And it really made me sad, because unfortunately, after reading the last 7 books, it's really lowered my overall opinion on the series, when pretty much, you know, that's a big chunk of the series of books that I simply did not like. And so that just really disappointed with me. So to talk some more specific things, I'm going to get into some spoilers now, and then I will get back to talking more generally how I feel about the series, what problems this gave me, and what my thoughts are on reading the series at this point. So you can skip past the spoilers if you've not read the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, but I'm going to get into some spoilers for now, so once again, timestamps down below. So the story here we have, of course, if you've read, is we introduce a bee who is Fitz's daughter, who also is part white, and we're given some explanation about it's because of Fitz and the Fool being together for so long that it made it happen. So it was different having a new POV character, but I was generally okay with that. The problem is, we have the whole first book being pretty slow, pretty normal with Hob, and the impetus at the end of Bee being kidnapped by the whites. And from that, we have the entire book 2, where we're really just, like I said, it feels like we're stalling. We're waiting for the Fool to get better, yes, but the Fool ends up just leaving without being better, and it all works out fine anyway. But most of the second book felt like it was just designed to kill time, and really kind of didn't do a whole lot. The thing that was the worst, though, really for me, was book 3. Book 3 felt like a loose outline that was rushed, and then I guess what's supposed to be fan service, as the characters just decide we're going to take a really long, winding path and visit everybody in between. Going to Kelsingra, I suppose, kind of makes sense, because they're, you know, trying to use the pathway of the stones, but at the same time, they've been able to use different stones before, so even that wasn't entirely necessary for it to go that path. But as we find out, the reason that this specifically happened is so that we could have the paths cross. But the whole fact that the problems for me really started, one of the first big things that just irritated me, is we literally have Fitz go visit Verity's dragon. At no point is there even a thought that, oh, I need to go a long distance and then kill a bunch of people. Maybe I should wake up these dragons. Not a thought whatsoever. You know, I'm sure there could be some arguments against it, because, you know, he is aware of what happens when they fly over people. But if they take an untraveled path and go, I mean, presumably, I know it's temporary, but never even a discussion on taking them at all, never even thought about, which seemed pretty dumb overall. And then we get into Kelsingra, where we just spent a lot of time with Rapscal, which, out of all of the Rainwilders, which I didn't like any of them, to be honest, but Rapscal's the one that we're sticking with, really. But once again, we have a situation where Fitz is offered help from the dragons. He doesn't trust it, but think about how much quicker, if you have even just a couple dragons, how much quicker you could probably get there. Hebe's definitely fine with riders, and we know Tintaglia probably not. Tintaglia. Andrew's going to yell at me for saying it wrong again. But probably not, but like, don't even think to ask for help. They find out later they're going to get it anyway, but now they're going to go by boat, and they're going to go all the way through the Rainwilds, and suppose that they don't end up stopping in Bingtown, but go through there, got to stop in the Pirate Isles, and all of this just seemed manufactured in order to get us to see all of these characters. And it's set up too, so that they're going to be taking Paragon to go and travel, at least for a while, to go. And once again, Paragon is never the right choice for a ship. Paragon seems to only exist to cause drama, and even the captains know that, but the whole entire part where the Fool just says it has to be Paragon, why. It really didn't make much of a difference in the end. The entire subplot of drinking the silver, turning a live ship into dragons also makes absolutely no sense, because if it would have been something, this once again, where there were so many things that if they were written a little bit better, it would have been fine. It could have been something like the skill would turn them into some semblance like the stone dragons, where they're not real dragons, considering the cocoons are made of sand that's the same base stone, but no, turns them into real dragons. Which makes no sense at all, because the stone dragons aren't real dragons. In the Rainwild, not in the Rainwild, in the Live Ship Traders, it's even specifically commented that dragons would be offended, but no, turns them into real dragons, which makes absolutely no sense. But there was no reason for Paragon to come at all. Stopping in the Pirate Isles, no reason for that at all, but to give us some characters we don't know much about, that we don't really care about, at least I didn't. They're like legacy characters. The legacy characters aren't actually there. It's the children of the legacy characters that we're dealing with for the most part. And it just seemed like we were really pushing just to get to the end and spend very little time actually on Claris with all of that, the thing we've been leading up to this entire time. And just have the dragons conveniently show up, but have reasons not to show up when they don't want to, and kind of go from there. It really just didn't make a lot of sense with the plot. It seemed very forced, very rushed, just so that we could take the least likely path, basically, is what it ended up being to get there. And then on Claris, the thing that just really, for me, it set the rest of the book on to be very disappointing, is when they're trying to escape, and the whole place is coming down, it's on fire, and Fitz is the last one to go through the escape tunnel, and decides he's just gonna, I think I'm gonna walk around and find a torch, and, take my time. And I know Fitz is dumb, but that was too much. That was just too much. It was such a stupid cliche thing that would happen that you would razz in a movie if they did it in a movie. It made no sense at all, and was just done basically to have him die and separate him from the group. And then, when he gets out anyway, the fact that he conveniently can't skill, despite being covered in skill, he can't skill to anybody to tell them he's fine, even though they're still within sight. But then he's fine. He's still going to travel home. Nope, he's got to accidentally go to the wrong pillar, which also, just, come on. I know he's dumb, but all it does is have him separated and make it so that there's no chance for him to really get closure with anybody. And I was talking to some people about the whole worms thing. Like, I'd actually be somewhat okay with that. I don't think it's the best way to end. I think it would have been better if he just realized he was done and needed to go carve his dragon anyway. It still would have been emotional and you could have all the same beats. But him going home with everybody, thinking he's finally going to get to be happy, finding out he's dying, and then having to go carve the dragon, still a hands-down better ending. Still get a lot of the suffering, the emotional pain that Hobb apparently wanted to cause us, but it's just done in a way that makes more sense versus just splitting them off for no reason and then have everybody show up at the end. Now, the actual ending, some of those scenes were very, very good, and there are parts, it still kind of got me at the end, but it's just the entire path, how we got there, was just plain not good. The other big thing I want to mention, besides specifically the actual plots and books themselves, is that, in my opinion, the last 7 books do actually bring the series down, not just because they're not as good, but they kind of take away the importance of the events of the Tawny Man trilogy. Now, the reason for that is the Tawny Man trilogy, and the big thing the Fool was supposed to do is bring dragons back into the world. Now, the Tawny Man trilogy, Fitz and crew risk their lives, go through everything, fight the Pale Woman, Birch dies, all of these things happen so that they can free Icefire, and presumably so Icefire and Tintaglia can mate and start repopulating dragons. Now, I know having just 2 dragons, obviously, not the best case, you would want more, but that whole thing was not necessary after the events of the Rainwild Chronicles already, because of the fact that, well, turns out these other dragons that, and at first in Rainwild Chronicles, at first it seemed like, oh, well, they weren't going to survive, so it makes sense, but no, they ended up being fine, they ended up becoming full dragons, completely able to mate, and so, and Icefire just kind of says, I'm out of here, and just flies off anyway, and so, already, that kind of hurt things, and just made it so that it wasn't necessary to happen, and there was nothing in the Fitz and the Fool trilogy that really kind of explained that. It even references sometimes how they brought the dragon back, and no, not really. That whole thing, if Icefire would have died, it would not have mattered one bit. at all. So it's just that entire part, it just doesn't matter, you know? Even if Icefire completely died, well, I mean, Tintaglia could have just eventually mated with one of the other dragons. If she didn't want to, all of those new dragons could mate. And so that's completely taken away. And we find out, too, in the Fitz and the Fool, that, like, very specifically, the Whites, the servants, whatever, they were trying to make sure the dragons died, and that was the whole reason for it. But even then, they sure failed to do anything about the ones in the Rain Wilds at all. And so it's just kind of, the two series, adding them on, take away so much of that, and just make it a lot less meaningful. And does, unfortunately, hamper my opinions of those books as well, even though I still love, especially the Fitz trilogies in the first 9. It damages that, because we find out, oh, I guess it didn't really matter after all. And then again, in Fitz and the Fool trilogy, when we find out that just giving enough skill to life ships, which you could make the argument that they wouldn't have found that out without the dragons going to Kelsingron in the Rainwild Chronicles, but, you know, the Fool just kind of knew about it anyway and wasn't told specifically by anyone, so I'd argue that it still could have happened. And could have just gone to find it and done that. And then, boom, more dragons. So it's just, dragons seem to be quite easy to get overall, and not at all worth the lives of people to go try and save one particular dragon. So really just unfortunate that that happened as well. So getting to kind of my overall thoughts, because like I said, so now I've talked some of my issues non-spoiler and some of my issues spoiler, and really what this comes down to for me is that it feels like the series should have ended the final book of the Tawny Man trilogy, Fool's Fate. That was a very solid ending, and everything after there has been suspect to me. The Rainwild Chronicles I did not like at all. I will never read those books again. They're not ones I would reread. I did not get any enjoyment out of them. I think they were very much a lesser quality than all of the other Hob books that I have read. Not even just because they felt YA. It's just lots of it didn't really. There wasn't much to like. I didn't really care for the characters. I felt like some of it was just things we'd already seen before, and it really didn't do it for me. And then Fitz and the Fool, which did feel more like the Hob books of old, but also not quite like the Hob books of old either, because there were so many things that were sloppy, that felt forced, or just felt like we were just trying to see how much needless suffering can we put our characters through. I would say, by pretty much the definitions of the word, Fitz and the Fool trilogy is grimdark. Unless you're one of the people say it's a style, then same way, it's in that style. The Fitz and the Fool trilogy is just how much pain and suffering can we cause all of our characters and make it as bad as possible. That's kind of what this trilogy did. So it gets an ending. Parts of it, like I said, worked, but I just don't feel like any of the events in this book were really necessary, and it just kind of ruined some of the mysteries. I was excited to find out some, but so many things were revealed that just made it worse in a lot of ways. Didn't make a lot of sense. As a side note, I hated the audio for these. I did audio for like a book and the middle book and a little bit of the last book before I switched to just physical because I didn't like the audio at all. That's completely neither here nor there, but I figured I should mention that. But really, it's just these books brought down Realm of the Elderlings for me, and I'm really sad to say that. I was really hoping that the Fitz and the Fool trilogy would bring it right back up, but it just kind of takes something away by making the events from those books feel like they were not nearly as important as they seemed at the time because of these things that happened later. And it's so many things in it are just done like, oh, it's the only way it has to be. You know, we're dealing with prophecy and that kind of thing, so I can see that as somewhat of a reason to say like we're forcing to this type of thing, but just with everything set up by the book, the way it felt, things just did not feel the same, and it definitely felt of lesser quality. And I'll stand by the first two books were not bad, even though it was a sliding scale of enjoyment, but this last book had a lot of things that made no sense, were written for no reason, were done as fan service, and it was just objectively not a good book. Some people may still enjoy it, but objectively there were many things that were wrong with it, which is really disappointing when you're getting to the 16th book of the series. For me, I honestly kind of wish I would have stopped after the Tawny Man trilogy, and I don't really know that I could recommend reading the last 7 books in the Realm of the Elderling, if I'm being honest. I really hate to say that, and I think if you it's hard to say, because if you're as big a fan as I was after the first 9, I feel like you're going to read the last 7 no matter what I say. But at the same time, it was just so disappointing to finish this series and end up where I'm at. I never expected that to happen, but this was such an unsatisfactory ending in so many ways. Even though some parts of it, like I said, it's not outright awful, but it's not good either. There's still some really emotional scenes, but once again, it seems like all we're focusing on is doing the most damage so that we can have the most emotionally exhausting scenes as possible, no matter how much sense it makes or doesn't make. And that's just, I guess, not what I go for in a book, and it's not what I'd come to expect. Like, the Realm of the Elderlings will break your heart, but it was also still always well written, and it felt so intentional and so planned. The last 2 sub-series, the last 7 books, don't feel nearly as planned. They feel a lot more slapshod, and just kind of have things happen, and it's really, really unfortunate. So I'm not outright saying don't read these books, but I did not enjoy the Rainwild Chronicles at all, and the Fitz and the Fool trilogy was a very, very disappointing end to one of my favorite series of all time. I don't know if I'll ever reread Fitz and the Fool. I definitely won't read Rainwild Chronicles. I've thought about whether or not I'm even going to keep those books. I am getting rid of Rainwild Chronicles because I don't want them on my shelf if I'm never going to reread them, and unfortunately, these books may be going with it as well, because I just don't know that I'd want to read it and then go through that disappointment again. I'll reread the first 9 the rest of my life, but that might just end up being it for me. So really, that's what I have to say on Realm of the Elderlings and the Fitz and the Fool trilogy. I'm sad to make this video. I wish I could say, ha, it was a joke, I actually loved it, but I really, really didn't. I was coming in completely ready to be blown away, and I even was told some things, like as I was reading, I was kind of warned that there were some things that were kind of dumb, things that weren't going to make sense, and so I even lowered my expectations, and similar to the Rainwild Chronicles, still found a way to disappoint me, which I really just didn't think Hob would ever do to me. So I'm sorry, Robin Hobb, I still love you, but this was really, really disappointing for me. So that's kind of where I end up there. I'll do my normal closing stuff. You know the stuff. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the link in the description for the Wizardly Do It Discord if you want to yell at me about my opinions on Realm of the Elderlings, or talk about other stuff, or maybe let me know if you agree. Apparently there are others out there. I was complaining in a Realm of the Elderlings Discord, and I got backed up on a lot of it. So check that out as well. Let me know in the comments, like I said, if you completely disagree or you're really upset that this is where I landed too. I'm happy to have that conversation about it, as always. And then, of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.